Hi, this is Martin from Daddy Rolled a One, and you are listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 2. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school RPG paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and no character will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. Chapter 71 begins with Jace's ascension to level 7. When we rejoin the story, the fighter has lifted the woman on the altar into his arms and is carrying her back the way they came. While the others discuss whether or not they should proceed now that they have an unconscious woman in their charge, Jace is rapidly falling in love. He has no idea that the woman is actually a succubus and that he has succumbed to her charm enchantment. That's why, when her eyes flutter open and she invites him to kiss her, he does so readily. Of course, a kiss from a succubus is really bad news. The moment their lips touch, things go from blissful to agonizing. Jace is drained of the level he just earned. And then, as Sivan transforms into her true demonic form and the companions fall back in shock and fear, he loses another. Sivan clearly intends to drink his soul to the dregs, but Shawnee manages to hurt her with Culfrey's sword, the Sentinel. This changes things for the demoness, who thought herself immune to harm from mortals. A quick battle follows, in which she is further hurt by Shawnee's and Yellowfly's enchanted blades. But before they can destroy her, she vanishes in a cloud of brimstone. Chapter 72, Part 1, Day 184, Time, Unknown, Party Status, Yellowfly, 32 of 44 hit points, Shawnee, 28 of 33, Jace, 33 of 38, Catsbane, 17 of 21, Bazu, 19 of 21. Spells available. Catsbane has memorized Detect Magic, Magic Missile, Web, Mirror Image, Haste, Slow, and Dimension Door. Bazu has prayed for Cure Light Wounds, Light, Bless, Locate Object, and Cure Serious Wounds. Shartoon's breath. What was that? Some kind of devil?
I believe, in fact, that it was, a demon, one called a succubus.
Catsbane had read about succubi and other types of demons in Zygog's Pantology Demonium, though he wouldn't have recognized it had it not taken on its true abyssal form. Demon? Did you kill it, Catsbane?
No,
replied the young mage.
In fact, I don't think I even hit her. She merely disappeared.
Yellowfly spun around, raising his sword as though he expected the demon to reappear right behind him, but the creature was gone. Jace! It was Shawnee. She had thrown herself on the floor beside the pale and withered fighter. Shawnee, is he? Began Yellowfly, coming over with a worried look on his face. I don't know. Just look at him. Jace appeared dead. He was lying on his back, with his legs splayed out and his face looking hollow and old. Jace's eyes, once bright blue, were now the color of robin's eggs, and they stared straight up, unblinking, at nothing. Bazu, come here! Yellowfly barked. The cleric had walked away to retrieve his holy symbol, but now he hurried back to tend to his fallen companion. As soon as Bazu touched him, Jace sat bolt upright and sucked in a huge breath of air.
Where is it?
He said in a panic, looking around with terror in his eyes.
Where did it go?
And then, without another word, he collapsed into racking, uncontrollable sobs. Bazu and Shawnee held him and stroked his hair, now streaked with white, while Yellowfly and Catsbane looked on, feeling a mixture of relief and pity. Jace looked like a man who had lost part of his soul. By now, most of the incense haze and brimstone smoke was gone, and Yellowfly could see, just beyond the dais, an opening in the wall that led further on into the dungeon. "Can you walk, Jace? Give him a minute," said Shawnee. "Can't you see he isn't ready to move yet?" "Oh, I'm sorry," replied Yellowfly. "Jace, take all the time you need." Just as he finished speaking, something caught his eye from back the way they had come. Beyond the fountains and water features, in the statue's courtyard, the legion of candles was beginning to dim, going out one by one. From where the companions were, it seemed like a cloud of darkness was slowly creeping their way. "Catsbane, your lantern," said Yellowfly.
Right. Yes, good idea,
replied the mage, producing a tinderbox and kneeling down to strike the flint. He had the lantern lit by the time the last of the candles went out, and now the companions once again found themselves in the amber circle of its glow, unable to see very much beyond. They stayed where they were for another quarter of an hour, until Jace said he was ready to continue. He still looked old and withered. On the inside, he remained heartbroken. The feeling of love, it had seemed completely real. Impossibly, it still did. If he had magically been granted a wish just then, he would have used it to go back to when he held the woman in his arms. As long as he had lived, there had never been a moment when he'd felt happier. Loss, shame, the sudden wrenching twist from sublime joy to abject misery. It was devastating. He wondered how he would ever feel good again. At least he still had his friends. That was something. He was on his feet now, and Shawnee still had her small arm under him. "You'll be all right, Jace," she said soothingly. "We're here for you." Bazu also put a hand on Jace's shoulder in support.
"Yeah, I'll be all right,"
said Jace, trying to believe it. He reached up and felt his cheeks and under his chin. There were puncture marks and dried blood.
"Let's go."
"Everyone, be on your guard." Yellowfly was in the lead. "That thing disappeared. It might reappear. Be ready for that." The hallway behind the dais was too narrow to permit the companions to walk two abreast, so they had gone single file. Catsbane, then Bazu, Jace, and finally Shawnee in the rear. The passage took them straight for 30 feet, then down a short flight of stairs and into another passage heading in the same direction. It terminated in a round arch, beyond which they could see a room. Well before they reached it, they could smell it. An odor of unwashed bodies and death, similar to, but stronger than the smell from the prison level above, was present in the air. "Be on your guard," repeated Yellowfly. The warning was unnecessary. Everyone could sense that they were walking toward something dreadful. "Hold up the lantern," Yellowfly instructed Catsbane as they passed under the rounded arch. The mage did as he was told, illuminating the space in front of them. They were in a strange chamber. It was shaped like a capsule, longer than it was wide, and rounded at either end. The far wall was curved, as was their own, and a second identical arch mirrored the one they now came through. The side walls were festooned with chains and manacles. Most were empty, but not all. 3 rag-clad bodies drooped against the left wall. The middle of the chamber was not empty either. It featured a low square of iron, the size and shape of a bed, though from a distance its purpose was not readily apparent. There was something on the floor behind it, too. As Yellowfly and Catsbane moved further into the room, they saw that it was not a thing, but a pit behind the square of iron. Catsbane's lantern light also revealed some more detail of the square as they drew close. It appeared to be a bed of nails, an iron frame with dozens of sharp spikes sticking straight up from it. "What in Vasaluna's name?" muttered Yellowfly. Was this another torture device, like the ones they had seen in Culfrey's dungeon? Reading his thoughts, Catsbane looked from the hanging corpses on the wall to the bed of nails.
I can think of only one use for something like this, Yellowfly.
Shawnee and Jace were still by the arch, talking in hushed tones. Meanwhile, Bazu had walked directly toward the left wall, where the corpses hung. The cleric's heart was still racing from the encounter with the succubus. He had intended to threaten her with a righteous and holy command, but she had not been cowed. Not in the least. In fact, she had laughed at the attempt and returned a threat of her own. He could remember every syllable.
I will feast upon your soul next, puppet of Sadal.
Is that what she had been doing with these poor individuals? He wondered, looking up at the corpses. Devouring their souls? He suddenly realized that he recognized the face of the middle one. In life, Brother Ligo had been somewhat plump, but this corpse was no more than a slender strip of bones held together by skin. Bazu sighed heavily, squeezing his eyes shut against the sight, and then turned his back on his former brothers, moving into the middle of the room to rejoin his companions. Shawnee and Jace were there too, now.
It's a bed of nails and a pit,
explained Jace as the cleric approached. When he asked what was in the pit, Jace replied,
You don't want to know, Bazu.
But the cleric looked anyway.
It's been 7 years since the masked court fell and the Empire began dying its final death. Once a member of the elite Imperial Special Service, now turned bounty hunter, Sejana Lushale fights for survival in a universe full of turmoil and confusion. She'll use her wits, her laser pistol, and the power of the void to face the growing tension in the Catsbane system. This is Steve Morrison of the Errant Adventures podcast, and on this new season I'm using the tabletop RPG Traveler to bring to life my own space opera setting, full of bounty hunters, religious zealots, and people struggling to survive and find joy in the dying lights of an intergalactic empire. Join me for this new adventure, and welcome to Book 1, Meridian. I'll see you out in the deep.
Chapter 72, Part 1, Day 184. Time, unknown. Party status. The party status is unchanged. I'm not sure how much more of this I can take, said Shawnee, her voice thick. She was looking into the pit behind the bed of nails. 10 feet down at the bottom were a number of corpses. Shawnee thought there were 7 or 8 of them, but it was hard to say precisely because they'd been thrown one atop the other in a heap. They were so shriveled and desiccated that they were little more than husks. My head is starting to hurt, said Yellowfly, also looking down at the grim scene. Actually, Yellowfly's head had been throbbing ever since they had inhaled the demonic incense back at the dais. And it wasn't just a headache. His conscious mind was being invaded by sporadic flashes of intense visions. One was of the demon's leering face. Another, an endless mass of writhing insects. The most recent ones were fantasies of violence. The thoughts were not his own, and he wanted them out of his head. He looked away from the pit, wiping his face with his forearm, and regarded the others. Were they going through the same thing? We should give this place a thorough search, he said. Having something to do would make them all feel better. Shawnee, can you check the other arch? The rest of us can examine the walls. The companions agreed and split up. Shawnee circumnavigated the pit and approached the arch of the far wall. Bazu walked to the wall without the hanging corpses to conduct his search, and Jace went with him. Yellowfly and Catsbane took the other side. The mage knew Brother Ligo, but he did not recognize him or the other 2 priests. Deprivation and suffering had caused too much change on their faces, and besides, Catsbane avoided looking at them too closely. Like Yellowfly, he concentrated on the wall itself. As they searched, a thought recurred to him that he'd first had while they were waiting for Jace to recover back at the dais.
Yellowfly?
What is it, Catsbane? The fighter seemed very intent on the stones of the wall, pushing and tapping each one in turn.
I was wondering about a couple of things. Did you notice how the demon reacted to us?
Reacted? Well, I'm not sure what you're getting at.
I mean, she recoiled when she saw your sword.
I cut off her damned wing with it, so that's no surprise.
No, I mean before that. I think she recognized it.
That had not occurred to Yellowfly, who stopped tapping stones and looked at the young wizard. That would make a certain amount of sense. What else were you going to say?
I'm sorry.
Didn't you say you were wondering about a couple of things?
Oh, no. Just the point about your sword. That's all.
Oh, said Yellowfly, scratching his light growth of beard. His head still hurt, and he was beginning to doubt his ability to concentrate. Well, if it fears the sword, perhaps it'll leave us alone.
Yes, I do hope you're right.
Catsbane did have another thought, but had decided at the last minute not to share it. He was certain that the demon had deliberately avoided him, specifically. At one point it had made as if to lunge his way, and then turned and attacked Shawnee instead. He would have sworn that had happened, even if it had all occurred in the space of a single second. Yellowfly had turned back to his stones, trying to find the one he had inspected last, and resuming his search from there. I think there's a chance that the PCs will discover something during their search, and since my DM side hasn't made a decision about whether or not there might be any traps or secret doors in here, let's ask the dice. For the arch, I'll roll a d20, and on a 1, there will be a trap. There's no need to roll Shawnee's Find Remove Trap skill until that's been determined. Here's the roll. A 10. No traps, and so no further roll is required. How about the other PCs? They're looking for secret doors in either wall, with 2 PCs at each side. Normally, there'd be a 1 in 6 chance to find a secret door if there was one to be found, but in this case, I'll use a similar mechanic as with the arch. I'll roll a d20, and this time, on a 20, there will be something hidden from sight. As with Shawnee, the roll to discover it can wait. Rolling for Jace and Bazu's side. A 2. Now for Yellowfly and Catsbane. A 9. Looks like everything to be found in this room is, disturbingly, in plain view. Since I have the action paused and some dice near at hand, let's make a couple more rolls. Earlier, Yellowfly worried that the demoness might suddenly reappear and attack them by surprise. I briefly considered having her do just that, but the thing is, Sivan fled for her life and even lost a wing to the Silverthorn, which she does, of course, recognize. She's in no hurry to tangle with the man who wields it again. On the other hand, she serves Azor Azul, and these mortals, she now realizes, present an existential threat to her master. Furthermore, she's been instructed not to harm the wizard in the group, as Azor Azul intends to inhabit his body and would prefer it to be fully intact when he does. I think a reaction check makes more sense than a morale check in this situation. The lower the number on 2d6, the more likely she is to stalk the party and attempt to harm them in some, probably indirect, way. On a very high roll, I'll rule that we will not see her again, at all. Rolling. A 3 on the dice means she is not going to give up. Her fear of Azor Azul is greater than her fear of the Silverthorn, I suppose. There's one last thing I wanted to discuss while I'm away from the narrative. Let's talk about dungeon design. I've said before that I don't have a map for the ruin, and I still think that's the right way to go, even though I can see certain benefits to having it be predetermined. At one point, I even considered using, or rather abusing, my ultralight game One Shot in the Dark to generate a map on the fly and at random. That seemed like a cool idea at first, but as brief as that game is, where every room can be navigated in a minute or two, used for this purpose, it could potentially drag the pacing down if I ended up with too large a dungeon. Maybe that's something I can save for Season 3. Right now, I think the tempo needs to ramp up, and that means, from here on in, it's all killer and no filler.
Yellowfly, perhaps we'd best be moving.
The fighter had once again lost his place. Had he already tested this stone, or not? His concentration kept on being broken by horrendous thoughts.
Perhaps we should be moving on. There's not much oil remaining in the lantern.
It had only just occurred to him to check, but when Catsbane had seen that there were only a couple of hours worth of fuel remaining, it had given him a chill. The thought of being in the ruin, without so much as the light of their lantern, was unthinkable. "Oh, I see," replied Yellowfly, immediately adopting the other man's concern. "Let's get the others and go." He glanced over at Shawnee, who was by the far arch. In response to his tilted chin, she silently kissed the air in the direction of it, a common cant sign that indicated that the way ahead was clear. Yellowfly then collected Bazu and Jace. The latter did not look good. "Are you able to go on?" Jace only nodded dumbly, and Yellowfly was not convinced. "Bazu, is there naught you can do for him? Some healing prayer you can say?" It was a fair question. Bazu had healed them all in the past, at one time or another. But the cleric's only response was to look at his feet. Jace answered for him.
He already told me that his magic could only cure physical hurts. What happened to me was something deeper than that. There's nothing he can do.
Bazu sniffed, and Jace patted him on the back.
That's alright, Bazu. I know you'd help me if you could.
Yellowfly didn't know what else to say about it, so he just nodded stiffly and walked over to Shawnee's arch. After a moment, everyone else followed, and soon the party was moving through a new hallway that went straight for 40 feet, then turned right and continued for a similar distance. They could see that the passageway terminated not in a door, nor an arch, but a cave-like opening. Long before they reached it, they were struck by a new smell, this one even more unpleasant than that of the succubus's lair. "Oh, rotten fish," said Yellowfly, stating the obvious. The stench grew stronger and stronger as they progressed, until it was almost enough to make them retch. At some point, Shawnee covered her nose and mouth with the hem of her cloak. Yellowfly, Bazu, and Jace would have done likewise if they'd had a free hand, and the stink was so powerful that, after a while, Catsbane sheathed his magical dagger so that he could hold his nose as well. He was currently third in their marching order, which had Yellowfly in the lead, Shawnee second, and Jace and Bazu bringing up the rear. As they made their way, Yellowfly instructed the cleric to check behind them every so often. He was still worried that the demoness might reappear. But she did not, and they made it all the way to the cave-like opening unmolested, save for the ever-worsening odor of dead fish. Ahead, they could make out a dim light, so Yellowfly told Catsbane to shutter their lantern for the time being. Once that was done, he led them to the end of the hall and through the opening. They found themselves on the upper lip of a large bowl-shaped cave, some 50 feet across, and deeper again by half. It had a ceiling crowded with stalactites, and a ridge that spiraled down and followed the edge like a corkscrew. The light was coming from below. Yellowfly crouched down and had his companions do likewise. He put a finger to his lips, and then they all crept to the edge and peered into the pit. At the bottom, a trio of braziers described a triangle around a large pool of water, some 30 feet in diameter. Its depth was unknowable, although Yellowfly surmised it must not connect with the same body of water they passed after the room with the Hellhound statues. If it had, the water level would have been much higher, all the way to the roof, if his understanding of how these things worked was correct. Then again, in a place like this, perhaps the laws of nature did not always apply. The braziers were lit, and the reflections of their flames bounced off the water and all over the cavern, even all the way up to the stalactites that overhung it. Their shadows played weakly in and among the underside of the dripping stone forms. All around the pool, ringing it, were dozens upon dozens of fish carcasses, and perhaps thousands of bones of all shapes and sizes, so many that they covered the entire floor. Some were small, but others were as long as a man was tall. Among the heaped fish bodies were tentacled things and shellfish, all dead. On the far side was what Yellowfly took to be an enormous, stunted stalagmite, at least until it moved. When that happened, he jerked back from the edge, stifling a gasp, as did his companions. They all looked at each other with wide eyes before creeping back to the lip and peering down once again. What in Marith were they looking at? Yellowfly wondered. Perhaps they really weren't in Marith after all. The thing at the bottom of the pit was alien, monstrous. It was no stalagmite, but a hulking toad-like creature. Even seated against its hind legs, it must have been 10 feet tall. It had mottled gray-green and knobby hide, malformed limbs, and a broad, wedge-shaped head. Slime dripped from its chin and glimmered in the firelight of the braziers, which lit the creature dramatically from underneath. Yellowfly saw that one of its eyes was missing. The other was bulbous and round, with a horizontal pupil set in a yellow-green iris. Mercifully, and perhaps because it was half-blind, it did not seem to have noticed them. The smell coming up from below was eye-wateringly strong, and Yellowfly could feel his stomach beginning to churn. He swallowed down the rising taste of bile and tried to breathe through his mouth, but it didn't help. Just then, the monstrous toad thing below shifted its weight and lumbered over to the half-eaten carcass of some giant fish. It reached out an arm, and although its hand was clawed, Yellowfly saw that it looked more like the arm of a man's than a toad's. It scooped up a chunk of soft gray-white flesh and came away with a handful of meat. He could tell by the way it sluiced open that it was putrefied. The mouth that opened to accept it was wide enough that it could have eaten a man whole. When the creature turned again, as one, the companions pulled back. Yellowfly looked at the others, and then pointed back the way they had come. But Catsbane shook his head.
Didn't you see?
Whispered the magic user. Yellowfly squinted, not understanding. He knew Catsbane wasn't referring to the monster, as no one could have missed that. Catsbane pulled close and whispered his explanation right in his ear.
There's an exit at the bottom. If we are to go forward, we must get past this demon.
Thanks for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you've enjoyed the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You could recommend it online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up One Shot in the Dark, the Pendulum world-building tool, or Encyclopedia Manticorica on DriveThruRPG. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. My thanks to everyone for their support of the show. I'd love to read one of your kind reviews at this point. This one was left by Hamudith on the Podcast Addict app. Hamudith writes, "This podcast was one of the first of its kind. It's not unique at this point in time, but it's still the best. I always go back to S1E13. Gyrios' awakening is an amazing scene. The narration, the choice of music, the emotion. You're a master of your craft, John." That is too kind, Hamudith. I'm pretty sure I'm not a master of the craft, but I am a dungeon master of the craft. I should take this opportunity to thank Abel Enzo and the Iron Realm podcast. This was, and is, the original semi-actual play, and it is hugely inspirational. Anyway, thank you for your review, my friend. Speaking of friends, where would I be without my voice talent? This episode features two of my Tumbledye amigos. Kyellen and Kevin play Catsbane and Jace. For listeners who'd like to get in touch with me, I'm at Manticore Tale on X or Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram. If you prefer email, I'm at taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. Finally, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore. It's the story where chaos rolls.
Hey there, Manticores. I know you have an advanced taste in quality RPG content. I bet you would love diving deep into the minds of the people making RPGs. Tabletop Talk is the podcast for you. I'm Craig, and I sit down with the brilliant minds behind your favorite games to uncover their creative process and the stories behind their work. Tune in to hear from the game designers, artists, and writers who bring your tabletop experiences to life. Join me and my guests on Tabletop Talk. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.